Hello, everyone. My name is Clara Rodrigo. I'm a clinical psychologist and IFS consultant, and I run a clinic in Madrid called Acerca de Psicoterapia. And several years ago, I felt the need to invite IFS experts to offer their wisdom translated into Spanish, making this amazing model accessible to more people. Today, I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Robert Falconer, Bob, an anthropologist, author, therapist, and distinguished IFS teacher. He's a regular in this masterclass series, and he recently joined us to present his workshop and book, The Other Within Us, which we truly enjoyed. Today, he's back to present on his new workshop, Healing from Child Sexual Abuse with IFS. Hello, Bob.
Hi, good to be here again, Ana Clara.
For me, it's an honor to have you as an expert on such a sensitive topic that touches you so directly. I greatly appreciate your generosity in accepting my proposal to share both your experience and your knowledge about sexual abuse so that it may be of help to all listeners and especially to those of us therapists who will attend you online on November 15 and 16. So, when you are a survivor of child sexual abuse, it is very difficult to explain to people who haven't experienced it how it has affected every single area of your life and changed the person you were born to be. It has not only created a disconnection from yourself that separates you from the world and from you inside of you, that like creating a wall that separates and isolates you from everything.
Mhm.
So what do you do with this, Bob? Where do you start to heal?
I think you're very right to emphasize isolation as one of the core damages of what child sexual abuse does to people. Um, and what we have to do, the isolation occurs both inside the person and between the person and the external world. And I believe that we have to heal both, obviously, but we tend to overlook the healing that has to occur in the inner world of the person. When there's child sexual abuse, often the natural multiplicity of the mind, the fact that we're made up of many different parts, that gets exaggerated, and these parts become hostile towards each other and isolated. So it's that internal connection that I think we need to focus on first in restoring health to survivors. Of course, we need the therapist client connection or nothing's going to happen. But once we get that, we need this and then start working in the external world. This is very different. This is something in IFS that's quite different from many traditional ways of dealing with childhood sexual abuse.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned the therapist, the role of the therapist. I think is representing the exterior,
Mm-hmm.
to witness and to find a different connection
Mm-hmm.
nowadays. Yeah, and you mentioned how I have that you mentioned that IFS has been fundamental in your healing process.
Yeah.
So, what would you highlight regarding the contribution of this model to the trauma of the to the treatment of the trauma and specifically to child sexual abuse?
Okay. Um, I want to say something a little bit off topic because I never stick to
Please.
outlines. um, I was sexually abused as a child very, very severely, um, sadistically, and prolonged multiple offender. So all of my early therapy career was focused on my own healing and helping other men with similar histories to mine heal. And this was even before I discovered IFS. I was the executive director of a small nonprofit called the Institute for Trauma Oriented Psychotherapy for more than a decade. And at that time, childhood sexual abuse was not recognized as a reality by therapy, by anybody. It was denied and put in the closet. So it's been a long, hard fight to have it recognized and have healing take place. And we actually collaborated with another nonprofit, the Survivors Healing Center, and we had a storefront, literally a storefront where we would offer healing to survivors. It really was a grassroots thing that grew up from the survivors and their therapists and then got into the academic world. I did not know IFS in these early stages, and as I look back, I really wish I had, because IFS offers a clarity and a roadmap that make it vastly more efficient than the ways I knew at the time, which were the best we had. I think the key word about why IFS is so potent is that it's respectful. When we go into someone's system, we respect the protectors, the ones who've created the walls, and the hurt, wounded children who are hidden and hiding in basements of the mind. We don't go in there and try and bulldoze the walls and get through. And we respect the inner wisdom of the person and how their system was created. So we don't create internal wars. We create internal peace. And that can dramatically reduce the amount of time it takes to heal and the amount of upset and emotional distress that occurs during healing. Healing from child sexual abuse always, I think, involves emotional upset and distress, and it's never easy, but it's a lot less with IFS.
Yeah. You are going to talk us about the complex reorganization of our inner world in the face of such a traumatic event.
Mm-hmm.
You want to give us a preview of some of the protectors and exiles we will encounter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, glad to. In IFS, the first thing is we know we're made up of many parts. Mind is multiple, and this is actually a good thing. It's not the result of trauma. And what happens with trauma is the divisions between all these parts become more extreme, more isolated, and more hostile. We are more like a football team than a tennis player. And for a football team to play well, all the players have to be cooperating. If they're fighting with each other, it's not much of a team. So with that basic model in mind, there's two very large classes of players on our inner team. One is protectors, and the other is exiles. Exiles are the classic wounded child, the parts of us who held the memories of the abuse all those years. And very often they're buried deeply, deeply in sub-basements of the mind because we couldn't tolerate that amount of pain and that amount of human betrayal. So we buried them away. And then there's these protectors who are the ones who did the burying. And there's a couple varieties of them we'll talk about. But traditional child sexual abuse therapy, they would see this wounded child over here and they would just blast past all these protectors to help that wounded child. Of course, that's what your heart wants to do. But it causes all this chaos. The protectors get really angry at you and they double down and they fight back and oh, it's a big mess. So in IFS, we're very respectful of the protectors and we greet them first and we don't go into the exiles without their permission and approval. So that's one very big thing. The other thing in IFS, besides all these different parts, there's something else in us that IFS calls the self with a capital S. And that's the seat of our attention. It's what we witness from. And the self can never be damaged or dirtied or hurt. It's always, always okay. And it's always curious, calm, compassionate. They're these 8C qualities. And it's a super important message for survivors of childhood sexual abuse to know that their core self, who they really are deepest inside them, cannot be hurt. And it cannot even be dirtied. Much of my early healing, I was told by many well-intentioned therapists, oh, with the kind of trauma you had, you're damaged, expect a miserable little life. And, that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. The core of who we are, where the light of consciousness enters into us, cannot be hurt at all. That's an incredibly powerful message for survivors. And it's not what was being told them when I was coming up.
But many times they don't have even the experience of self, no? They have been so isolated. And
yeah, definitely, Ana Clara.
And what's harder to deal with, Bob? Dissociation or shame?
I wish I had a clear answer. It depends for the person. Each person is different. Every person is different. And IFS has this model that's quite specific and has all these names and stuff. But I think it's super important that we remember each person is a totally unique individual. And when we're sitting with someone at a deep, deep level, they remain a mystery, no matter how long we sit with them. I think that's beautiful and wonderful. But a lot of therapists get sort of scared by that. Oh, where's my landmarkers? How do I know where to go? So we just have to ask. If somebody comes in with dissociation and shame, which one's harder for you today? Because next week it might be different.
Yeah. I don't know how to answer. Both are difficult. But in therapy sessions, maybe for therapists, dissociation is very difficult.
IFS has a completely different way of dealing with that than what I was taught before IFS. And we treat dissociation as a part. And I think it's vastly better. And we'll be talking about that a lot in the workshop.
Yeah.
And also the idea of the window of tolerance. And so treating dissociation as a part really, really is a dramatic change in how we function as therapists.
I am looking forward you show us how to deal with these dissociative parts, to be able to work and befriend these parts so we can access the exile. Yeah. But I believe that the spiritual damage that you mentioned in the flyer is the part I'm most eager to hear about in your talk. Can that damage be healed, Bob? Can the freshness and innocence of a child be recovered?
Yes.
We are a sample of this, right?
More than that. Yes, it can be recovered. And
I can imagine it's a long journey, right?
yeah. And I think the freshness and innocence of the childlike parts of ourselves are often our deepest gateway, our deepest access to the spiritual realm. And we somehow don't expect the youngest, most innocent parts of ourselves to have these ancient wisdoms, but very often they're the pathway to finding it. And when they're buried in the sub-basements of our mind because of all the trauma they're carrying, it cuts us off from our spirituality. And this is one of the great damages of childhood sexual abuse that isn't worked with enough. I want to say, mainly for a long time, I worked with men who were sexually abused as children because nobody wanted to work with them, frankly. Almost all the therapists working on child sexual abuse were women, and women led the way. You know, it was women survivors. So there weren't very many of us men who were willing to admit that we had been sexually abused and raped as children.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed working with all these men is that men who'd been abused by a teacher at school or a coach on a sports team did better than men who'd been abused by a priest or men who'd been abused by a minister. And
Oh,
I wondered about that. And then I thought, when they're abused by a religious leader, it cuts off their access to the depths they somehow have to find a way back to. And I don't have numbers, there's no way to measure this, but
yeah.
things that damage our ability to connect spiritually really stunt and limit our healing.
Yeah, you mentioned priest, but I suppose that with family members is something similar because it's somebody you don't expect. You expect they love you and that this doesn't happen, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a woman named Jennifer Fried who we'll be talking about, who wrote about betrayal trauma. And she thought that human betrayal was the heart of trauma. And the closer the person who abused you, the greater the damage. And that is testable. And she is a professor and is producing, empirical studies to show that, yeah, this is true.
The betrayal of your family and the betrayal of your body,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? Many
Yeah.
times. This is really something difficult to work with in therapy sessions, no? And if you allow me, I would like to mention two important issues that I think you are going to mention during the workshop. One is that we all have a defense system that freezes us in dangerous situations to help us survive.
Mm-hmm.
And the lack of understanding of how our brain works has caused a lot of harm to people who have been judged for not defending themselves.
Yeah.
Another one is that sexual abuse and the difficulties it brings to your adult life are enormous. Whether the abuse was violent and extreme, like in your case, or whether it was an inappropriate touching or a lascivious look from a family member that I saw in my therapy sessions. And the latter, I sometimes find more difficult to address, both because parts come into play that minimize it, that also feel complicit, etc. What do you
Yep.
think? You will be talking about this?
Definitely. And this is a really important point. My father abused me violently and sadistically. And my mother also abused me, but she was sort of seductive. And because I felt more complicit or more like a willing participant, it actually damaged my heart and soul more profoundly.
Yeah, I think the spiritual damage, as you mentioned, is bigger, even bigger. Yeah, in these cases, because with sadistic, it's easier to help
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
to feel you are not part of this. But when you feel that you can be part of this, maybe there are a
Yeah.
lot of people struggling with this, no?
An extra level of poison.
Yeah,
Also, children's bodies respond to stimulation. So they very often experience sexual arousal while
yeah,
they're being abused. And they feel their own bodies have betrayed them. So it's another level of isolation. I
yeah,
think isolation is a very, very key word about sexual abuse trauma.
yeah. Isolation and the secret, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Would you like to tell us anything else about the workshop or any recommendation of any reading beforehand?
There's so much to read now. When I started years ago, there was nothing, and there was nothing about trauma either.
Yeah.
Trauma was not recognized in the DSM, the manual, until 1980. And before then, all the authorities, all the big shots said, nah, it doesn't happen. That's not real. So it's quite new. Within my lifetime, trauma, psychological trauma in general, and child sexual abuse specifically have come out, and people are starting to deal with it directly. So that's an incredible shift and really, really important, and it gets ignored. I just want to say again, I'm really grateful to be doing this workshop because this work with trauma, specifically child sexual abuse trauma, has been the basis of all the other work I've done. And most people in the IFS world know me as the guy who works with the spiritual dimensions of IFS and guides and unattached burdens and all that stuff. Everything I do is based on healing from trauma. That's the foundation, and it's so important. So I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to talk about this for a couple of sessions.
That's why you are very spiritual and you are more connected. Yeah. Yeah. This is a good part of trauma, that when you live trauma, you become a different person at the end. It helps in many cases. And of course, as therapist, right?
Yeah, yeah. And something I say to therapists all the time, because much of my efforts now are training other therapists. The number one way to become a better therapist is do your own work. And most therapists do not want to hear this. They would much rather go study a textbook, but I'm sorry. The number one way is do your own work. And there's
Totally agree.
great. I have never seen an upper limit to doing the inner work. There is more and more, and it becomes, I think, more and more a matter of accessing spirit and spirituality and becoming a bigger and vaster human being and developing compassion that can hold greater and greater things. I've not seen an upper limit. I don't think anybody's done.
Yeah, I think so. I think you need to be in therapy for your whole life, no? Like
Yeah.
the
And
same that you go to the gym, a
yeah,
brain gym
yeah.
and a heart gym.
Yeah, and it's sort of going to therapy becomes more and more of a spiritual practice.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, yeah, you need as a psychologist, you need to grow and improve, and maybe you connect with this spiritual part
Mm-hmm.
with time and
Mm-hmm.
experience, no?
Yeah.
As always, thank you very much, Bob, for your caring and compassionate way of sharing all your knowledge. And I'm looking forward to see you soon on November. I don't know if you want to add something else.
Nope, I think that's complete. I'm really eager to do this.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank
See you
you.
soon. Bye.